What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another 3D model. This week, we're going to be making a stylized ice cream truck. And not only that, we're going to do something that we haven't really done before on this channel. We're going to have a little bit of a Q&A and talk about some random questions that the community has asked me over the past few weeks, and just talk about some random stuff. So we have lots to cover in this week's video, so let's just get started. So over the last few weeks, I've been just thinking about what type of content I want to make for this channel. Of course, we always make 3D models, and that's not going to change because that's the whole point of this channel, and I just enjoy making random models. But I thought we can start doing other types of videos as well. And if you can see on the thumbnail of this video, this is going to be episode 1 of this Q&A stuff. Now, every video isn't going to be just about Q&A and stuff. It's going to be different topics. But what I realized is when I'm doing my work, either at my day job or I'm just creating these random models for YouTube, I always like to have some sort of podcast or some sort of video playing in the background. I don't always have time to look at the video, but I enjoy just hearing people talk about random topics. And I thought it would be fun to create something where we can talk about art and 3D models and specifically 3D type of content and just more or less just chat about random stuff. Hopefully I can incorporate random people and talk about their questions and their answers, and every video can be about a different topic. So for this video, I wanted to keep it very straightforward. So I thought a Q&A would be a really fun way to introduce this type of format. So over the last few weeks, I've been asking my subscribers here on YouTube, my Discord members, my Patreon members, and people just on Instagram about what type of questions they would have, either 3D or non-3D related, just any question at all, and I would answer it in this week's video. Now we'll go over that really soon. Of course, we're going to be making this stylized ice cream truck as well. So let's just quickly go over this model and then we can dive into a few of those questions. Now, I live here in Ontario in Canada, and it's been quite humid lately, and it's actually been ridiculously hot. And I just got me thinking about ice cream and refreshing drinks, and I thought it'd just be fun to make an ice cream truck. It just popped in my head randomly one day. So I jumped on Google and started looking around for ice cream truck reference. I ended up coming across these two images, which I really liked. I love the stylized look, and I thought we don't do enough of that on this channel. And it's always fun to make stuff that's not too realistic and more comical. So I just more or less wanted to recreate this photo. And that's what we're going to be doing in this week's video. Now, as you can see, we're just going to start with the main blockout stage like usual, try not to rush things, and move on to those little details afterwards. Now, the fun thing about models like this is that you don't have to worry about the proportions too much. In fact, the more weird and non-proportional it is, the more fun it is to look at. And it kind of goes down that stylized route. And that's sort of the direction I was aiming to work towards for this model. Now, there's a lot of different approaches we could have done with this. For example, I decided to separate all of the walls and the roof and the front hood. That way I can create some really nice seams between all of these pieces. But that's obviously a little bit more work that's not always necessary. We can always just create some sort of bump or some line in the texture to create that definition where those seams would be. And you don't have to add so many polys to just separate all of these different meshes, but it's always nice creating those separate panel pieces. So that's something I decided to do for this week's video as well. So I'm just gonna start with the main structure shape of this whole truck. And then I can just highlight them all and extract them to separate them from one another. And then using the smoothing tool or preview smooth, I can just smooth them out to create some fun shapes. So we're going to go over the typical model like usual, and when the 3D process, sort of the UV mapping process comes along, we'll also go over that as well as the textures. But rather than having something a little bit scripted or not talking too much, this is going to be a little bit more podcast-like, where we're just going to kind of wing this and just see what happens. Now, these questions aren't in any particular order. In fact, I was pretty shocked with how many people reached out with questions. So firstly, I just want to thank everyone that took the time to write in a question. It means a lot to hear from you guys actually reaching out and contributing to this video. So thanks to everyone that took the time to write in a question. I don't have the time, I don't think, to actually answer them all. So I just picked like a handful of them, and I'm going to save the others for future videos. I'm not honestly sure how long this is going to take. We're just going to kind of wing it and see how it goes. But I thought this would be a really great question for the first question of the video. But this first question was from a subscriber or a follower named Faku. And his question was, did you learn on your own or study somewhere? If so, where did you study? So I thought this would be a fun question because it's a little bit of my history that I haven't shared with any of you guys. So I did go to school for 3D art. I originally went to school actually for game development. And at the time, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do with my life. I was right out of high school. Like many people, I'm sure, don't really know what they want to do. So I enjoyed playing video games, and I thought, hey, it would be kind of fun to learn how video games are created. And to be honest with you, there was many times throughout going to school that I just felt like dropping out. School wasn't the best thing. I feel like it was a fairly new subject at the school I went to. It was Algonquin College here in Ottawa. And it was fairly new, so the professors didn't really know how to teach it. Every year it kept changing, so I feel like we were kind of test subjects for this specific topic or this course, which doesn't really help, to be honest. But I learned a lot about what I don't like in game development and things that I do like. It was my first introduction to 3D modeling. We had a 3D modeling course, and I thought that was super interesting, of course. Like, that was probably the highlight of all my courses. And I also realized I didn't like coding that much. It was just a different thought process that didn't work well with myself. I tried learning how to code many times, and it just wasn't enjoyable. I don't know why, but it was always a challenge. It's definitely a tricky thing to learn. It's like learning a whole new language. But I did gravitate towards 3D modeling. So a lot of the tools that I use in everyday workflow here on YouTube or at my day job as a 3D artist, I actually self-taught myself a majority of that. A lot of the things that I learned, so I originally learned 3ds Max, which was pretty good. To be honest with you, it wasn't my favorite. And I kind of explored other 3D software, and I fell in love with Maya just from the workflow. We'll go over that later because some people had similar questions, but I ended up just learning the whole workflow myself. But school did teach me that these workflows existed, if that makes any sense. So I kind of learned like what 3D modeling is, what UVs are, very broadly speaking, what really how models work in a video game. So it kind of introduced me to the topic, and then I more or less learned all the things, the main stuff that I know and I do in an everyday basis, like creating this ice cream truck, is just from self-taught. And there's so many resources available online, free resources, and I just kind of self-taught myself. So a little bit of both. When you ask, did I learn on my own or study somewhere? I did actually study somewhere, but majority of stuff I did learn by myself. But thank you, Faku, for the question and for contributing to this video. It's a really great question, and it gives you a little bit of my history. I think school is really important. Unfortunately, you need a certificate to get a lot of these jobs, but to be honest with you, you can teach yourself basically everything without school. In fact, you can probably teach yourself better than a lot of these facilities can. And I don't want to downgrade schooling because school is really important, and I'm sure there's some really great resources out there, like really great schools and professors and people who really know their stuff. Unfortunately, where I went to school, there wasn't the best educators, I guess you can say. There was some really great teachers, but also some really bad ones. And I had a mixed experience, though school did allow me to get that certificate that I needed to be recognized when applying to jobs. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's important because in the world we live in, you do need schooling to show that you can learn, but you can also teach yourself almost everything. And at the end of the day, a strong portfolio can outperform almost everything. And we'll also go over that in this video as well. So thank you, Faku, for the question. And that's just a little bit of my history. And this leads me to the second question I have. And this is actually from another subscriber or a follower named Gonzalo. So thank you, Gonzalo, for the question. But this one, he asked how to land your first job in the video game industry or indie dev. Please, thank you. And that's a great question. Like many people out there, getting your foot in the door is honestly the hardest part about the whole process of getting a job. The first job is always the hardest. After you get that experience, it's a lot easier to get more jobs, but there's that whole struggle and the battle of like, how do I get experience if everybody wants to hire somebody with experience? How do I get that experience because nobody wants to hire somebody without experience? And my advice would be building a really good portfolio. There's many places out there that will give you a chance, even if you don't have a lot of schooling, if you just have a really good portfolio and you show you can do the work. Because at the end of the day, that's all they really want. They want somebody that can do the work. Now, there's a lot of other places that you can get experience without actually having a job. Like there's a lot of game jams or small projects or even student projects are just a really great way to build experience and show you can actually work in a team, which is really huge in the industry. The hardest part is getting your foot in the door, but staying consistent and building a really solid portfolio, you can definitely make it happen. I'm almost certain actually. So just use those school projects as a way to show that you're working within a team and just build a really great portfolio, and you just keep applying. It's a grind. To be honest with you, it brings back so many memories when I was right out of school and I had zero experience, and trying to find a job was very frustrating. So I feel your pain, but there's no magic sauce. It's just honestly building a really good portfolio, showing you can do the work, and just keep applying. Shoot out as many resumes as you can. Shoot out messages to people that work at the studios you want to work at and ask them, what are they looking for in an employee? What can you do to stand out from others? Reaching out to people, connecting. LinkedIn is just a really fantastic place, which I'm sure majority of you people know, but just stay very active online and just talk to people, connect with people, and honestly, don't stop learning. Just keep learning, keep building a portfolio, and it will come. So thank you, Gonzalo, for the question. It's a tricky one. I wish I had more advice on how to land your first job, but at the end of the day, it's just showing you can do the work. That's really the only way you can get a job, and just connecting with people. Also, like recruitment people at studios. So a lot of studios have specific people that work in recruiting. Find them on LinkedIn. You can actually go through the employee list at certain studios and you can find the people that actually hire, like the hiring people. You can just message them really quickly and be like, hey, what are you guys looking for? Please check out my portfolio here and link your portfolio. And, one of them is bound to land. Someone's going to take a look. And a lot of people just want to see the initiative of somebody actually doing that. And don't use ChatGPT to summarize your same letter that you're copying and pasting to everybody, because a lot of people can kind of read through that. There's lots of, it's good to use that maybe as like a foundation to your letter of recommendation, or your messaging like a recruiter at a studio, but make it sound like you, make it a little bit more personal, add a little bit something in there that it's a little bit unique, because a lot of people, if you can only imagine if everybody's using ChatGPT, which I'm sure a lot of people are, it's going to sound very familiar and very similar to one another. So try to make it stand out, add something in there that's unique, or just completely write it yourself. Be confident in your abilities and just talk, be friendly, and showing the initiative of reaching out to people is going to stand out, because there's a lot of people that just apply to jobs and don't take that extra step. And I feel like, just staying consistent with that, you will definitely land your first job. Just keep building your portfolio, keep messaging people, keep reaching out, sending as many portfolios and resumes out as you can, and it will happen. I promise. So another random question. I actually get asked this question quite a bit. And this is from Vivek, and there's a bunch of other people out there that actually messaged me as well about this topic. But what is my opinion about AI 3D model generator and AI in general? This is a tricky subject because, AI is exponentially growing. But when it comes to 3D model generators, they are definitely nowhere near good enough, in my opinion. I've seen some of them. I actually tried one randomly just to see how good they are, and the topology is like awful. I'm not going to lie to you. They can make some basic models, and I'm sure over time that stuff will get better, but I don't think it's anywhere near replacing jobs just yet. And to be honest with you about the whole AI topic, I know this is something that, a lot of people talk about and are worried about. And this is obviously just my perspective. I'm just a random 3D artist, so take it with a grain of salt. But I don't think it's going to fully replace our work. I'm sure eventually it's like, in years and years to come, like it will be able to spit out really great optimized models for video games or whatever you're throwing this model into, like a movie or a game engine. But I feel like you're always going to need somebody to tweak things to either, input the information to the AI to make these models to, I feel like the jobs are going to naturally change as the stuff comes out. So I don't think it's going to be like a full-on replacement, like we're all going to be jobless. I feel like there's always going to be a need for human art. And if anything, I feel like eventually there's going to be a pushback. It's like when the camera came out, there was people saying like, painting is going to be completely obsolete. And that's very far from the truth. People still paint to this day and people still crave human created artwork. And I feel like stuff like this, like video games and models, are going to be very similar. New stuff or revolutionary changes like AI is definitely scary. It's that next leap forward, just like when the computer came out. Everyone was scared that it's going to just replace every job. And think about how many other new jobs were created from having a computer at home. So I feel like AI is going to be a similar thing. At least that's just my perspective. But when it comes to 3D model generators, I honestly don't think it's anywhere near ready or good enough to use in a real game engine. So I wouldn't worry. That's just my perspective. But that's a great question, Vivek. Thank you so much for reaching out and asking about it, because I get asked about AI all the time. And I feel like a lot of people are worried. I wouldn't worry just yet. And I mean, worst case, if it just completely takes over the world, we're all going to go down together. So it is what it is. So the next question up is from a follower named Sukanya. And by the way, I'm sorry if I'm ever butchering anyone's name, to be honest with you. I am awful with pronunciation of names, so I apologize in advance. But this is a really great question. She asks, want to know about UV. After AutoCut, there is any way to match the edges. It's not happening seamless. And a big reason for that, in my opinion, is because it's AutoCut. It's auto UVing. Auto UVing is really not that great, surprisingly. It always chooses to make cuts in the most random places, like in the middle of faces, or not a straight line up the side. It like kind of picks random edges to make a cut, and it just doesn't make it clean. And when you're laying out those UV shells and you're applying materials, you can see those cuts really easily. So I'm not a really big fan of AutoCut, and that's probably why you're not seeing your edges match up nicely. And that's why you unfortunately have to do it manually. So in Maya, there's a tool called the 3D Cut and Sew UV tool, where you can just double click on your edges to create your own cuts wherever you want them. And that's just a better way of hiding those seams. You usually want to make your seams around edges or on backs of faces where you're not really seeing where the cuts are. So you can kind of pick, depending on how your object's positioned in your game or what the shape of your model is like, you can manually pick where those cuts are to kind of hide those seams. There's always going to be seams. And if you look at this ice cream truck, actually, if you look at my cone on the very top, I put a cut right on the back, and there's a render where I'm looking right at the back of the model, and you can see that cut. And I'm sure there's, I could have spent some time trying to hide that a little bit more, or working with that, the texture that I use, the waffle cone texture. But sometimes when you're using materials or textures just like that one, where it's just like a grid pattern, it's not always going to line up really nicely. So it's really up to you to pick where those cuts are. And AutoCut does a really bad job in choosing where those cuts are made. So my suggestion would just not use AutoCut. To be honest with you, AutoCut's really good on simple shapes. So if you have like a regular cube with no bevels, you can use AutoCut and it'll just cut it naturally, automatically along all those edges. And you won't really see a change in the texture because there's a hard edge there. But anything that's not really low poly and doesn't have a really clean cut, so anything with a bevel basically, you don't want to use AutoCut on. That's just my opinion. And I feel like if you start manually making your cuts, you will have a lot better results. So I hope that answers your question. Basically, just don't use AutoCut, unfortunately. Yeah, they don't really do a good job. So this next one is from another subscriber named Samit, and he asks, what's your usual game art workflow? Also, would you ever make a tutorial on the full pipeline? And how do you get ideas for your next video? So there's a few questions here. So let's go over the first one is, what's your usual game art workflow? Well, it really depends on if it's for a YouTube video or if it's for my real life job as an environment artist, or if I'm creating one for like a freelance job, making something for product design. It kind of changes depending on how. I know you said game art workflow. So if I'm making for a video game, I usually start with just a low poly, really similar to actually what I do here on YouTube. So just starting with a very low poly model, a blockout stage, as we call it, really blocking out those main shapes. Then I like to kind of work towards, you can either make a high poly mesh after, start adding lots of polys, create your high poly mesh, and then make a more optimized mesh from that. Or you can make a low poly mesh and then subdivide things to make your high poly mesh as well. So in a lot of cases for game art, you need a high and low poly model workflow. So you need a high poly model to create all your curvature, all your nice smooth edges, and you make a lower poly model that you can use in game. In a lot of cases, you can just transfer that information and you can use that on your lower poly in-game optimized mesh. So when it comes to what is my usual game art workflow, that's it. It's usually just start with a blockout, then create a nice high poly model from that blockout where I can create my texture maps from, and then create a lower optimized model for in-game use. Now, you don't always have to do a high and low poly model workflow. In a lot of cases, actually, in my experience, sometimes I just create one mesh and it's good enough, kind of like a mid poly mesh or something that's a little bit lower poly that you can use. And you don't really have to create that higher poly mesh to create all that curvature, all that information in your materials. So it really depends on what asset it is, how it's being used. Is it like a hero prop? Is it a background prop or just an environment prop? There's lots of questions that go into this that decide how you're going to create your model, but that's my usual workflow. Just create a blockout, high poly, and a low poly, and then create the textures afterwards. I hope that answers your question. But for the second part also, would you ever make a tutorial on the full pipeline? Now, this is funny because I get asked this all the time, and I have included some videos on here. The first one that jumped to mind is like the alarm clock or the CB radio. There's a few models that I created where I kind of go over the full pipeline. I've created a little bit of that high and low poly model workflow where I create the two meshes and I bake the information onto the lower one. But I don't do a lot of that on this channel. And the big reason why is because I do a lot of that at my day job. And I worry about optimization all the time, that when I'm making these videos, I try to make them as fun for myself as I can, so it doesn't feel like a job. If I spend all week kind of optimizing meshes, the last thing I want to do on my weekend is optimize a mesh. I just want to create a fun model, and that's a big reason why I tend to lean towards creating these higher poly meshes on this channel, and that's really the main reason why. Now, I do have plans to make more in-depth tutorials that show the full pipeline, so I've been meaning to do that for quite some time now, so there will be more coming, I promise. Things have just been so busy that I just don't have a lot of the time for it, but I will make more. And check out some old videos. I do have a lot of videos, or a few videos at least, that go over the full process, or at least explain it, and hopefully those can be helpful because it's more or less the same process over and over again for more models that you're creating for your game environments. Now, for the last part of that question, how do you get your ideas for your next video? That's a great question. And to be honest with you, I just think of just random stuff that I think is going to be fun to make. I think fun is the main factor. The second that it's not fun, this turns into more of a job, and that's the last thing I want. I want this whole, to stay consistent with creating models every couple of weeks. Like, it needs to be fun. I need to enjoy it. So it's kind of random, to be honest with you. Sometimes I get inspiration from the most random stuff. I just see something cool online. I'm like, oh, that would be fun to recreate. Or I'm watching a movie and something just sparks an idea, and I'm like, oh, I remember once I was playing Red Dead Redemption randomly, and I was like, oh, that'd be fun to make a building out of this. So I just created the Red Dead Redemption buildings. Or I'll see an explosive device online, and I'm just like, oh, that'd be fun. Now, to be honest with you, I would create a lot more weapons, but I feel like the algorithm really hates weapons, specifically guns. So I don't really make guns anymore for that reason, because I feel like naturally the videos just don't get a lot of reach, and I feel like the algorithm's fighting me with those for some reason. Maybe I'm wrong, but Otherwise, I just kind of choose random stuff. Like I said, I had the ice cream idea randomly pop in my head, so I thought, hey, let's just make an ice cream truck. That'd be fun. So I try to just change it up all the time as well. So, you know, if I create something that's really like realistic, I'll try to not make the next video realistic. I'll try to change it to like a stylized model, or try to keep it changing, try to keep it interesting so you're not seeing the same type of content. But nevertheless, I try to, you know, change it up every few weeks to keep it interesting. Hope that answers your question, and thank you for the question. Those were really good ones, so I appreciate it. So next up is from an artist, or actually a follower named Iodis. You can see his name in his image here, but he asked, or she asks, sorry, I don't know. Your lighting is so nicely diffused, thank you so much, and not harsh at all. Any tips? I've been thinking of having a pre-lit startup file. Do you use one? Now, I feel like I cheat when it comes to the lighting. Almost all of these models on this channel are just rendered straight out of Substance Painter. I use those pre-built-in lighting environments, and I try not to think about the lighting. I'm trying to really, most of the time, if you're familiar with this channel, I'm always saying how I don't have a lot of time to create these models. So the last thing I want to do is spend a lot of time lighting up a scene and tweaking lights and testing things out to get a really cool result. So I kind of cheat, I feel, and I just use the pre-built environments that come with Substance Painter. Most of the time I keep it as the panoramic, but sometimes I use the studio lights. So fun fact, if you use a studio light, it doesn't add any color into your lighting. It uses just white light. And a lot of times when you're texturing something to look a specific way and you use an environment light, it uses the yellow from the sun, from the light source that's mimicking the sun, and it can kind of change how your material looks, even slightly, especially when you export your files into, you know, like a 3D engine, like Unreal Engine, and you hook up your materials and you have different lighting in that engine, your materials will look a little bit different than they looked in Substance. So sometimes when I know I'm going to use this in a game engine, I'll always use a studio light. That way I'm using that white light and I can really see what those colors and materials really look like. Now, that being said, sometimes, or a lot of times, I just use a panorama, just very straightforward, the main lighting source that Substance gives you. And that's just because it's very easy. It looks really good. I think the Substance Painter engine, or the little renderer, is fantastic. And I don't put really much effort into that. When you mentioned about having a pre-lit startup file, that's actually a really great idea, to be honest. And I would recommend using like an HDRI. Sorry, I said that a little fast, but you can get some really cool results by importing some sort of lighting map into your file. And that's what I did at my old job when we had to do some renders right in Maya. We would just hook up some random cool HDRI and get some really cool lighting results. So you can play around with different colors from different environments and see what works well. And you really don't have to overcomplicate it. You know, with 3-point light, you can find a lot of lighting tutorials online. At my current job, we have specific lighting artists, so I don't even touch lighting. I just create the models and they make the cool wizardry behind lights. I don't know a lot about lighting, so I wish I can give you some more tips. But if you're just creating models for your portfolio and you don't feel like investing a lot of time, which you really should, but I use the really nice environment lightings that come pre-built in these 3D softwares. And there's other really great sources, like Marmoset has some really cool lighting environments in there as well. But Substance is fantastic. I love them. And almost all my models are rendered right out of Substance Painter. So I don't use any pre-lit. Well, I guess they are pre-lit technically, but not like a specific file that I use. I just use Substance Painter. But thanks so much for your question. That's a really great question. Lighting is extremely important. I remember hearing something back in the day. A lead artist of mine said, lighting can make a bad model look good, but bad lighting can make a good model look bad. Like, lighting is almost more important because it really changes how your model looks. So I'm not a lighting artist, and there's people that specialize in that specific field, and they're wizards when it comes to lighting. And, you know, it's a whole other realm of knowledge in that field, which I don't have a lot of. So shout out to all the lighting artists out there. You guys are crazy. And a lot of times you can make even the worst model look fantastic just by having a really great lighting. So lighting is important, almost more important in a lot of ways, you can argue. So anyways, Substance Painter for the win. They have really great lighting environments. So next up is from another subscriber or a follower, I think an Instagram follower, named Destiny. And she asks, if you were starting from the beginning, how would you go about learning to make furniture for gameplay and environments? That's another great question. So if I were starting from the beginning, I would just find tutorials online. And to be honest with you, furniture or regular objects is kind of the same approach, but that's a really big reason why I created this channel, because I found there was no one that would just show the full process. There's lots of people that show like how to create a model. There's a lot of people that show like the rendering, a lot of people that show the texturing, but seeing it all in one kind of process, at least when I was starting this channel, was really difficult to come by. And that really was one of the main reasons I started this channel in the first place. So not to, shout myself out, but find channels like mine, and there's lots of other really great channels out there. And I would just kind of see their workflow and learn what tools they're using and kind of mimic that. You can just straight up follow their same exact path and you can have very similar results. So if I was starting at the very beginning when I didn't really know anything, that's what I would do. I'd figure out how to do the modeling. There's really three main parts, right? There's a modeling, UV mapping, and texturing. And I would figure those three processes out and then, start with something very basic. Don't overcomplicate it. Sometimes at the beginning, you want to create, some really crazy cool furniture piece. Well, you're going to overcomplicate things. Start with like just a chair. Start with something super basic, like even a wooden box. Just start with something so you can figure out that process. And then you can start increasing your knowledge and start making more complex things slowly. Another big thing that I would recommend is like quantity over quality, especially when you're learning at the very beginning. Just keep making art. It's like the more art you make, the more things you're going to figure out. Don't be obsessed with trying to make one specific thing amazing, especially when you're just learning at the beginning. I think it's all about quantity, just making like hundreds and hundreds of models. Just keep making stuff and you're going to learn things the more you do it. I think it's, in my opinion, that's a quicker way to learn, is don't obsess over like, I don't know. I guess that's subjective, of course. Some people like working on like one big environment, but I feel like you can learn so much more by just making, like 10 models in a month rather than creating one bigger model. I guess that's just my personal opinion, but if I was starting from the beginning, that's what I would do. I would just figure out that workflow. Once you figure out the main steps and how to do that, I would just start just pumping out models, just keep practicing, stepping out of your comfort zone, doing things that you're not familiar with, because that's where the true growth happens in not comfortable situations. A lot of people like to stay in their comfort zone, and a lot of growth, unfortunately, doesn't happen there. So step out of that comfort zone, create as much art as you can, and you will only get better, I promise. And also, just jumping in between these questions, don't forget, I know I say this in all my videos, but you can find this full video in real time without me talking, just with music playing, so you don't have to hear me ramble on about random stuff. But you can find it all on my Patreon page, and you can also find all the working files. And it includes the full process, the full UV mapping process, every step in real time. So if that's something you're interested in, it's a really great way, in my opinion, to have that available, to also see like, have those working files on hand that you can have with you on a different monitor while you're watching and learning. Is if I could have that available when I was in school, would be crazy. And that's a big reason why I started this channel, was to give people that material or those files if they want them. And it's all available on my Patreon page. So you can find it all in the link in the description below. Just wanted to remind everyone. Anyways, back to the questions. So the next question is from Yakshit Aurora, and he asks, how to analyze and start a complex object. I always get stuck where to start. And that's tricky. It's complex, especially when you don't know a lot about 3D modeling. Like I said previously, a lot of people like to jump to like really complex objects without knowing a lot of the fundamentals, but it's all about blockout. Start very low poly and don't rush to add lots of polys to it. It's always way more difficult to come back and try to rework things than just spend a little bit longer making sure that blockout, the main silhouette of the object you're making, is looking good, and then you can slowly add more polys to it. So for example, if I'm creating a computer, don't worry about adding all the little buttons and all the little details and all the little computer chips. Worry about the case, worry about the main blockout. Where are those keys on your keyboard gonna sit? For example, if I'm making a keyboard, it's like I wouldn't jump to just making keys all of a sudden. I would just make the main rectangle for the keyboard, making sure it's the right spacing, maybe duplicate a bunch of little cubes in a row to make sure you have the length of your keyboard correct. Pre-plan how you're going to model it. So do you want to make it, how complex do you want to make it? Do I want to have little booleans or little extrusions in where the keys are going to be? Or are they just going to kind of sit on the mesh and I'm going to fake that with textures? So really pre-plan how you're going to approach your model. Spend lots of time. So like there's so many times, well, when like I'll just throw an image. Let's say there's like a fairly complex model I want to create. I'll just throw it on my monitor and I'll honestly just sit there and stare at it. It sounds crazy, but I'll just stare at it and think about, okay, what are the main shapes in this object? If I look back at previous models, for example, the last video that we did, so the tricycle, I would open up that image on my monitor and stare at it and be like, hey, like this thing's full of cylinders. I can do a cylinder for that main pipe that goes down the frame. Each tire is one cylinder, which is a boolean or a cutout in the middle. So I can just, take a cylinder and cut out the faces on each end and just extrude them inwards to create that tire. The handlebars, I can just kind of extrude another cylinder and use a smoothing effect just to kind of create that curvature, the bending shape of the handlebar. Just really thinking about it ahead of time so I'm not just sitting there while I'm adding objects in for the first time thinking about it. Really helps me pre-plan and approach the model. It's almost like makes the whole process a little bit easier because you kind of already thought about how you're going to approach some of these shapes. And sometimes before, just experiment, like throw in, for example, the seat on the tricycle. It's a kind of a weird shape. You can just throw in a cube and smooth it out to see what shape you get. Kind of add an edge loop, experiment a little bit before you actually start modeling it for real. You can kind of just play around with things to kind of get an idea of how you're going to approach. So I like just the pre-plan stage is huge for me. So that's definitely a suggestion or a tip that I would give is just like really stare at the model, really think about how you're going to approach it. And then that blockout stage is extremely important. So don't rush that as well. But that's my advice. Hope that helps. Start easy. Don't rush things. And work slowly and make sure you're happy with things before you move on to more fun things. Sometimes it's fun to add details, but it can definitely screw your whole process up. And next thing you know, you're jumping back and reworking stuff, and that just makes everything longer and more challenging and difficult. So that's my advice. Hope that helps. So the next question is from someone named Johnny, and he asks, what frustrated you the most in the beginning when you were starting learning 3D? I'm like a year in and there's so many little things I think I'll just never get right. Well, Johnny, to be honest with you, I can relate so much to that. When I was starting out, there was so much that just confused me. So probably the first thing that jumps to mind when I think about what frustrated me the most was probably how everything kind of connected. So like I understood that there was the 3D modeling. Of course, it was tools that I didn't really know, but just trying to like understand the whole workflow, I guess, was like the thing that frustrated me the most. So like I understood creating the 3D model. I understood, well, I didn't really know UVs, but I understood there was like something that was done about prepping your model for UVs and the whole UVing process. And then obviously I understood texturing, but like how the hell are those connected? How do you transfer that information over to your model? How do you export the textures and link them up? Like, I didn't even know what that was. I remember that was so confusing. I was just kind of stuck there thinking like, how the hell do you actually like take your model into something to texture it? Like, what do you do? How do you actually like draw on your model? Doesn't really make sense. Like some of the most basic stuff at the beginning when you have no idea how it's done is really, it's weird to think about. And now it's so familiar to me or to all of you artists that do it so much, but at the beginning it's like, what's going on here? I remember that specifically, just the workflow, how do you connect all these pieces together to actually make a model? And also, what was the most frustrating thing at the beginning was UV mapping. Like, so many artists out there can agree, UV mapping is a weird one to learn. It's just frustrating. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around. And I feel like, at least for myself, when I was trying to like understand it and learn from it, there's so many weird tutorials that I thought I was kind of having an understanding, and then someone would teach it so differently. And I don't know. It's just, UV mapping was definitely one of the most frustrating parts. And then once it clicks, I swear it gets easier. Once you finally make that connection in your brain of like, oh, this is how it's done, things get easier. But until that connection happens, oh man, UVing was frustrating. Looking back, yeah, that beginning process was a pain. So I feel it for all you artists that are just starting out or learning the basics. It's, it's frustrating. Learning new things is always challenging, but just keep learning, keep staying consistent, keep practicing, and that connection will happen in your brain, and you'll just be like, oh, okay, this is not as difficult as I thought it was. That's a really great question. Makes me think back to those frustrating days. Oh man, I just remember like actually trying to Google and find YouTube videos of like, how do you UV a model? And like, how do you export the UVs for your model? Like, I just didn't understand that connection. I remember that took me a while to figure out, but I was definitely overthinking it, or just didn't find a really good source to learn it. But great question. Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it. All right. Next question is from an Instagram follower, I believe. And this is from Zach.blend. Apologize if I'm butchering your name. But he asks, how blend corner crease like wall to a ground, or maybe a window to a concrete floor or a concrete wall? That's a great question. To be honest with you, this is actually something that I noticed in a lot of people's materials, is how do they merge those textures together to make it look realistic? And there's so many different techniques you can use, but one of the easiest ones is just adding like a darker texture where they're connecting. So if you look at a wall beside you, depending on the lighting in your room, usually there's like a crease there, like where the wood panel is matching up with your floor, or where the baseboard is actually nailed onto your floor. There's like almost like a little gap, very, very small. And that creates like a little black shadow. So one of the easiest ways to actually help make it look more realistic is by adding some sort of darkness there. You can almost like create the shadow yourself. If you think about it, really dirty like alleyways and stuff, or like walkways, dirt and dust gets pushed to the edges of the floor, and that's just where dust accumulates, and it's always usually darker on those little edges, even the finest little line where those materials combine together, connect. I find adding a little black or darker area, kind of creating your own shadow, goes in such a long way in making it feel more realistic. And I've noticed that in people, like in more beginners, when they're texturing scenes and they're creating like a room, it's just like, wood floor on like a painted wall, and just like there's no seam. It looks like they perfectly match, and there's no dirt, there's no darkness in that crease. So a really quick way of answering that would just create your own shadow, texture something that looks a little bit dirty there. Even if it's a clean room, like I'm looking over at my wall, I have a wood floor and it matches up with like a baseboard. And I can see like it's an older house that I'm in, but there's little dust. I should probably clean my floors, but the paint's kind of chipping in some of those corners, the edges. There's a little bit of a very subtle dark line where there's like a gap between the baseboard and the floor. And if there wasn't that, it just wouldn't look realistic, because nothing connects very perfectly unless it's like, in a perfectly new room, or I don't know. Even so, when those two different materials connect, there's usually a very subtle gap between them. So if you're looking for a really easy solution for blending the corners, like the crease between the wall and the ground, add that very subtle darkness to it, and I'm sure you'll get better results. And even like I do that with my models all the time on corners, on little edges and creases, like add a little bit of darkness there, add a little bit of dirt and grunge. Very subtle. Less is always more. Don't go too crazy. If you're unsure, go the less route, but add a little something and you'll hopefully notice a big difference. But great question. All right, so next question is from another follower named Vizim, and he asks, bro, what is the current situation of the 3D industry, and what about the gaming industry? To be honest with you, it feels sometimes like it's the Wild West. I feel like every time I jump on LinkedIn, there's layoffs happening, or it's pretty sad, to be honest with you. I feel like a lot of these bigger studios like hire people for a game and then just lay everybody off after. It's ruthless. So to be honest with you, it's kind of crazy. It can be demotivating seeing so many people laid off, or some really talented people that are just laid off. You're like, how the hell am I supposed to get a job if these people don't even have jobs? So that being said, there's always work out there. Like there's always people hiring. So I wouldn't get demotivated, even though it's very demotivating being on LinkedIn. And I feel like every time I jump on, I'm seeing someone new studio laid off like 100+ employees. But there's always people hiring. There's always, it's a vicious cycle, but especially in the gaming industry specifically, there's a lot of really great studios that don't work in that way. Unfortunately, the gaming world, at least from my experience, or people that I know that work for really big gaming studios, there tends to be like a lot of, hiring and then a lot of layoffs and then a lot of hiring and a lot of layoffs. It doesn't always happen, but when you say what's the current situation, it's crazy. I feel like it's the Wild West. You just have to try to stay motivated. Don't be too focused on all the layoffs. Don't get demotivated by it. Just keep applying. Focus on yourself. Your work will outshine others, like you just need to worry about your own work. Don't worry about all the other stuff happening. And hopefully it will eventually be noticed. Don't worry. Just stay motivated. Don't get discouraged. But yeah, it's crazy out there. I feel bad for all the layoffs too. It's like, it's not fun. I feel like studios should hang on to people and like build up a culture at your own studio. And the more people work there, the more they know about your specific game, rather than just hiring people randomly for a game and letting them go. I feel like a lot of studios would get more out of their employees, like longer term. But that's just my personal opinion. I don't know. I feel like a lot of these people are just worried about money at the end of the day, and they don't think about the actual artists themselves or people's well-being, which is very unfortunate. We live in a capitalist world where money is number one, so it can be challenging, but it is what it is. There's no way out of it. We're stuck in it, for at least for now, so it's crazy. But great question. To be honest with you, there's so many, when you say like 3D industry, there's so many different industries that 3D's in. So it's not just the gaming industry. I know gaming can be a little bit more vicious, but there's a lot of really great industries and there's so many out there. So don't think you have to be stuck in gaming. There's so many other things that you can bring your skills into. So just keep your eyes open and keep looking. There's always people posting for jobs. And don't get discouraged, but really great question. All right, so now since we wrapped up the 3D modeling, of course, we are making this stylized ice cream truck. So we're gonna stop all those questions and really quickly go over the UV mapping process and show you how I prepped this model for texturing. So here is the ice cream truck in its finished form. Now let me turn off this grid so you can actually see the model. Now, as you can see, I went ahead and just duplicated all the objects on this side to the other. So they're just mirroring each other. I did have to change my UV shells around a little bit because I wanted to have different labels on this side. So I did not overlap these UV shells. They're actually two separate. But everything is basically the exact same. So what I decided to do was break this thing up into 5 different textures. Now this is usually a lot more than what I like to do for my models, but I honestly didn't want to stress about optimizing this mesh. I decided just to break it up into 5 to make my life a lot easier. So let's go over this in the UV editor here. The very first group are basically the walls. So if I isolate it, you can see how I broke it up. Now I had a lot of extra room to work with. Originally, these two were actually combined into one. I had all of the walls in one mesh. And these two walls in particular were stacked on top of each other and sharing the same UV space. But what I realized is that when I wanted to add, Polly's ice cream on the top here, well, it would be showing backwards on this side because it would be mirroring it. So I had to slide this over and flip them around so they're both unique to one another so I can have the letters in the same direction. Now, of course, there are ways around this. You can simply just add a decal, and that way I can still stack my wall UV shells, and then I can add my decal over top of it. So my, that branding, the Polly's ice cream label would just not be actually stamped onto my texture. In this case, I wasn't adding any decals. I was going to add that detail directly onto my mesh by just pasting it right onto the material. And because it's a mirrored UV shell, that lettering would just be backwards. So I had to kind of work around this, and I decided just to separate those two wall UV shells. But I just wanted to mention the decal route because technically I could have done that and it just would have saved me space. So if it was like an optimized model for a video game, you would definitely want to go probably down that decal route just to save yourself adding more textures to your object. So last minute, I just went back and just separated to make two different groups. Originally it was 4 and I turned it into 5. So the first one are the side walls and the doors. Basically the main pieces I wanted to have like the text on. And then the second group are the other main walls. So the roof, the back wall, I knew I wanted to have some more icons, ice cream cones and stuff on this back. So I really enlarged them to be as large as I can, just get the most resolution out of those materials. And of course, trying to, keep them as straight as I can so it's really easy for me to apply those textures. And the third group are the wheels. I call it wheels, but it's also the grill, the bumpers, all the bottom components and the steps, as well as all the signs. So I wanted these signs to be quite large because I was planning to have, a menu on the back of the ice cream truck, and I wanted to have text saying ice cream. And, the smaller your UV shells are, the less texels, the less pixels you're gonna have to work with. And I knew that I'd have some blurry, text on there. So I really wanted to bring these over to their own UV group. That way I can really enlarge these shells so I can get some nice crisp text out of them. Now, one that I wasn't planning to do was this bumper. I added a little bumper sticker, and you can tell how pixelated it is because this UV shell is so small. So what I should have done, to be honest, is add like a little rectangle, like a plane. That way I can, have that sticker. I could have like fitted in somewhere bigger so it's not so small and it would have had, more resolution. So that's something I would have done differently, but I went ahead and just pasted it on. And you can see how low resolution it is, and that's just because the shell's so small. But all these tires, for example, are all sharing the exact same UV space. These are the inside rims. I have the outside rims. These are the tires, as you can see. They're all sharing the same UV space. And same with these signs. That way I can just write on one, and I just rotated it. Unlike the walls, I took this and just duplicated it and rotated it around so they were all sharing, I could overlap those UV shells. And the fourth group is all the inside components. So I knew that this was going to not be too much in view. There's going to be shadow, and it wasn't really important about the objects in here. It was more about filling up that empty space to look like there's something on the inside. So I really simplified a lot of these shapes when it came to like these containers. Like I didn't even add labels on them, which looking back, I probably should have. Or these cones, I did make the cones a little bit larger because I wanted to have a waffled cone texture on here. And if the shell was really small, I wouldn't be able to get that detail. So, they're all overlapping. But I probably could have done something a little bit more fun for the inside. I didn't have a lot of time, so I just simplified a lot of these shapes. And it is a stylized ice cream truck, so I didn't want to go too crazy with making these objects like crazy detailed because that kind of would break the whole style that I was trying to go towards. So I kept it really plain and just colorful by adding simple colors on these, containers. Like that way you can see there's something in here, but it's not the main focus of the ice cream truck. And the last one, I call it cone, but it's also just basically the last few objects I had in my scenes. So these little covers, the cash register, I actually separated because I wanted to add buttons, and I didn't add like different objects for those buttons. I wanted to really simplify it and just add them as little textures, like little cubes. I knew you wouldn't see numbers on them or anything. I wanted it to be kind of comical. So I just enlarged this one shell really big so I can add that detail and it wouldn't be too pixelated. And other than that, it's all just the ice cream cones and the front seats, which as well didn't add too much detail since you would barely see them through the window. I just wanted to add, throw something in there so you can kind of see that there was a seat there. There is no steering wheel, as you can see. There's nothing here. I probably could have added a steering wheel, but I knew you wouldn't see too much through the windshield. I wasn't planning on making it too transparent, which also I made quite large because I wanted to add some like windshield wiper marks, which also I did really quick. Looking back, I would have spent more time making this a little bit more detailed, but it is what it is. Kind of rushed a little bit of the texturing process, but that's how I prepared it. So I just need to apply a texture material to each of these groups. I can export this ice cream truck. We can jump over to Substance Painter and we can start our texturing. All right, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in that FBX file from. So when it came to the textures, I'm gonna use that one reference photo as my main reference I'm gonna work towards. So when it comes to the colors and textures, I didn't wanna really spend too much time thinking, how can I make this unique? Or I really loved how this one reference looked. So I more or less wanted just to recreate it. Now, when it comes to these labels, I just did all of that in Photoshop. So really quickly, just threw different text together to create some sort of Polly's ice cream logo that I can stamp on my doors. And I also jumped on Google Images to find different images of ice cream cones. And I found them, I wrote in like comical or stylized ice cream cones, ones that I thought would be fitting. I took those straight off of Google. So all credit to Google for those, but just little images of ice cream cones that I can paste all over my ice cream truck. And the only material that I downloaded from the Substance Source website was the waffle cone. And that's just like ice cream cone. You can Google it or search it, on the Substance Source website or straight out of Substance Painter in the materials tab. But I just downloaded that one quickly and just applied that to all my ice cream cones. But everything else is straightforward. Like always, I use smart masks or smart materials to fill in all these empty meshes with some sort of material and then slowly, gradually build them up. So I added fill layers and added different smart masks to add a little bit of dirt and grunge. I didn't want it to be too dirty, but I didn't want it to be completely plain. It was a mix of like realistic, but also very stylized and comical. So I was trying to approach something in that direction, but it was really fun to make. So everything is very straightforward when it comes to the texturing process of this video. But if you have any questions, don't forget you can reach out and ask me, just DM me. And don't forget you can find the full process in real time, which includes all the working files, and you can find it all on my Patreon page, which will be linked in the description below. All right, back to the questions. All right, so this is going a little bit longer than I anticipated. So we're gonna try to get through these next questions as quickly as I can, but I also wanna know what people think of this sort of stuff. It's really cool hearing your questions and trying to answer them the best that I can. I'm kind of winging this without really thinking about it, which may or may not be a good idea. We will find out, but it's fun just having a casual conversation and just talking about, 3D topics that other people may be thinking about or have questions about. So if you like this sort of video, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear back from you if you have any suggestions or other topics you'd like to talk about, because I know this one's more generalized Q&A. I would love to have other specific topics, like maybe one video is just talking about topology, or one video is just talking about, high and low poly model workflow, or one's just talking about career advice or just random stuff. And I'd like to hear other people's opinions as well. So getting other feedback from other artists that work in the industry would be fantastic. It's a great place that we can kind of all come together and talk about some really cool stuff. So let me know what you guys think. Obviously, every video is not going to be like this. I don't have a lot of time to talk. And to be honest with you, I'm not a huge talker. So it's kind of out of my comfort zone to do something like this. But if it's something you like, it's something I want to create for you guys too, because I feel like this can be really helpful for a lot of people out there. So let me know in the comments what you think about this sort of video. I really appreciate it. And apologize, I'm kind of losing my voice, so bear with me. So next up is from someone named Sai Malhotra, and they ask, can anyone tell me how I can maintain texel density for main body and bolts? Though I know about UV, transform, then set the number of texel density, but the main problem is when I do texture, it's fine on big parts, but small like bolts, etc. Textures get blur. I want to take zoom shots, but not be able to because of this. I tried laying it out I also tried layout of different parts separately, but small parts like bolts get more texel density than the big parts. Yes, texel density can be a pain in the ass sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. So when everything is sharing the exact same texel density, it's naturally gonna give those very small objects like bolts much less pixels to work with because it's matching that same texel density. So what I like to do, and what I know a lot of other people do, is that you take those smaller objects and you just bump them up. So unless you're not allowed to because you're following a specific texel density throughout your game, sometimes you're allowed to increase the texel density on those very small objects. So let's say I have a wood table, and that wood table has 4 bolts in every corner. Well, when I lay out that table, I'm going to have a lot of extra space probably in my UV space, the 0 to 1 space, to actually take advantage of. So rather than just keeping those bolts very small, I will actually purposely increase them, kind of break that rule of having equal texel density. That way I can give more resolution to those smaller objects. So that's my advice, that's what I do in all these videos. I do it in this specific video, I do it in all these models here on YouTube, is I give priority to the more important objects in my scene. Now, I understand, of course, you can't always do that. For example, I work at a video game company, and we have to follow a specific texel density, so all the objects look very similar in detail throughout the whole level. And that's just part of the downside of doing that. Like, you're going to have naturally less resolution in those very small objects. So there's no specific, at least from my experience, there's no like solution for that without manually increasing those UV shells sizes. But that's what I would do if I'm allowed to do it, is I would just specifically grab those bolts you're talking about and increase them, fill them up as big as you can, use up as much real estate as you can in that 0 to 1 space, and you'll have more resolution in those little tiny, objects. Especially when you auto lay out everything, it's going to make those little UV shells very, very tiny. And you will always get blurry, resolution. It's just how it is when there's not many pixels to work with. You just can't get as much resolution there. So I would just manually scale them up. I hope that answers your question. That may not be always allowed, and that's just something you have to deal with. You can always bump up your texture sizes as well. Rather than having maybe a 2K texture set, 4K will allow you to have more resolution there. So there's other little things you can do, but strictly speaking about texel density, it's going to naturally be that way, unfortunately. But try manually increasing them. I know I believe you said here that you have tried, because they will get blurry. So if you're going to take some really nice close shots, like close-up zooms, like if it's for a portfolio piece, I would just really increase those UV shells where you want more detail. And if those bolts are definitely getting blurry, I would just scale those up. But thanks for the question. Texel density can be a pain in the ass. I feel you. All right, next up is from someone, I believe, named Yazir, and they ask, how to lose the fear of softwares? Like how to not panic when something doesn't work or when something glitches. I get it. When you're following a tutorial, the worst is when you come across something and suddenly it's not working the way that someone else is doing it. That happens all the time, even to me now when I'm learning new stuff. And I'm like, I followed this exactly and it's not working. Well, try not to panic. I know it's easy to panic and be like, oh, this is not working and I hate life. But keep working at it. There's going to be a solution. You need to either look up other tutorials, look up other solutions online. Google is your best friend. Try not to worry about it. I know that's easier said than done, but when you ask like how to lose a fear of software, that's the worst part about learning new software, is that you don't know anything, and that process of learning can be challenging. But the more consistent you are, the more you stay consistent at learning it. Don't try not to get unmotivated because it can easily happen. I've been there so many times where things aren't working and I feel like they should be working and for some reason they're not, but there's usually a solution. So just stay consistent. Luckily, there's some really great, spaces like my Discord channel where there's lots of artists that are up there. People ask questions all the time when they get stuck on something. You can always DM me if you have a random question. I'm sure other really great artists out there will be happy to answer questions as well. So reach out to people, ask questions, and Google will be your best friend. Try not to stay demotivated. And I know learning new software sucks. It's like the first time I jumped into ZBrush, I was like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? I feel like that's like one of the weirdest ones I've ever had to learn. But like anything, you get better the more you practice and the more you work at it. So just stay consistent, try not to get demotivated. I know it's challenging, but that's what happens when you work with software. Great question though. All right, next question is from someone named Alexander, and he asks, how do you find the right balance with amount of dirt and damage you put on your models? When I do texture, I often put too much dirt and damage and I have no idea about the amount I should remove. Great question. And to be honest with you, when it comes to like new artists that are new with texturing, almost always, I swear, people are adding way too much texture. Like once you figure out you can add dirt, people go all out and they add like a ridiculous amount of dirt. But I always tell people less is more. Like honestly, keep that in the back of your mind. Less is more. If you're unsure, remove it. I always like to gradually build up dirt on model. So I will like start with you'll see in this model as well. I like to start with a fill layer, add a smart mask, add some little bit of dirt and gradually build it up. Don't start with a ton and then pull it back. I feel like that's harder to do. I feel like it's easier to slowly build it up, and less is almost always going to be more. I swear, if you look at any object in real life that's dirty, it usually comes from specific areas on an object, not everywhere around it, unless it like was dropped in a puddle of mud and it's sprayed completely with mud or something. Usually, like if you look at a car, for example, there's gonna be more dirt around the sides, around the wheels, around the wheel wells, or sprayed up on the side of it rather than the roof and the hood. Like your windshield, for example, when I was doing the windshield wipers, by the way, I rushed on this model. I should have spent a little bit more time. But there's more dirt around the outside because a windshield wiper actually wipes them away, or there's a different roughness values in a lot of these objects. So if you feel like you're putting too much, which I feel like a lot of people do, you just need to cut it back a lot. It's always easier to add more, I find personally, than taking stuff away. And always look at real world examples. Google Images is your best friend when you look for reference. If you look at like real life worn out objects, a lot of dirt and grunge happens around areas that are used more. So like a gun, the handle or the trigger will have more fingerprints, will have more smudges. The barrel will be dirtier from the gun residue. And like certain areas will naturally have more wear than others. Maybe the grip is more worn out from being rubbed on by your hand the more you use it. So really think about where these models are being used, how they're being used, how long they've been used, and really like pre-plan. I know I talked about that early on in this video, and it helps with texturing. It's like really think about who's using this, how it's being used, how long it's been used. Don't just start throwing on textures and dirt and grunge just for the sake of making it dirty, because too much dirt looks worse, in my opinion, than not enough. And I feel like that may be subjective, like my personal opinion, but I feel like you'll get better results by doing less. Just worry about specific areas on the model where they're dirty and add dirt in those areas. Don't use it everywhere. And you can always come back. Like I said, use Google as your reference, as your best friend, and find real world examples and try to mimic them. But really great question. It's something that I noticed in a lot of people that are asking for feedback on their art, especially when they're texturing and they figured out they can, add smart masks. They go all out and it looks just like way too much. So remember, less is more. All right, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to get through the next few questions because I feel like I should answer more questions. There's a lot of really great questions people had. So unfortunately, if you don't see your question here, I will answer them in future videos, I promise. I just honestly didn't think this would take as much time as it did. But next up A really great question from Ryan Lycos. And Ryan, by the way, I want to give a special shout out because he's the one that created the animation that you see at the front, the beginning of all my YouTube videos. He's such a talented animator and artist. Everybody should go give him a follow. So big shout out to you, Ryan. You're super talented. And I wish I could animate things like you. You are an animate wizard. But he was kind enough to also ask a really cool question, which was, when you're texturing, what would you say is the most important part of the process? Is it the base color blockouts, masks, or the finer details with the normals? That's a really great question. And to be honest with you, it's hard to think of like what's the most important because of course the blockout is extremely important. It's the base color that you use. In all my YouTube videos, I always talk about picking a foundation that you can work off of. And that's why I'm a big fan of the smart materials here in Substance Painter because they're just great foundations to work off of. And it's really difficult and challenging to come back and change that initial base material. So the base color and the blockout of the texture is always extremely important. But I think when what would be the most important and what makes the biggest impact would probably be the masks, in my opinion. It really just adds realism, and if done right, it really makes a model feel used and realistic, like it's lived in, like it's an actual real prop. And I feel like that's probably the biggest impact on something that feels a little bit flat, unrealistic, versus something that takes it to the next level. The finer details, like the normals, is obviously really important too, and it really depends on what material we're talking about here, because I feel like different things are much more important in different materials and how those materials are being used and which types of models are being used on. Like, are we going for realism? Are we doing stylized work? Because I feel like micro details and stuff like that is much more important when you're dealing with like a really realistic asset, a hero prop versus background prop, of course, and etc. But I think just all around generalizing everything, I think masks play a massive role. And I think if you're looking for ways to improve your models, masks and roughness values can go such a long way. I feel like they make or break the model. I feel like if your masks are flat, it can really look like plastic and things can look off really quickly. But that being said, if your base colors are off, no amount of normals will save it. And if your normals are noisy or misused, it's going to look cluttered and fake. So they honestly all play such a big role. The most important part, honestly, is like the roughness values. I feel like that's something that really makes an object feel real. Now, if you're going for realism, obviously, and not all objects need that, like this model, the ice cream truck, it's kind of comical. So I didn't want to add too much roughness values to make it really, really realistic. But when you're looking for texturing, like those details go such an extremely long way. If you're looking for ways, this is just for everybody. If you're looking for ways to improve your texturing, add a fill layer in Substance Painter, add a fill layer, only add the roughness value and throw in like a texture and throw it onto the roughness and play around with that slider to increase the roughness just so you can have a little bit of glare. That alone is like, will go so far in making your model look better. So I think when it comes to like it's tough because it's the most important process. That's a really great question. I should have probably thought about this a little bit ahead of time. Like, of course, the blockout is really important, like finding a nice foundation to work off of, because without that, you won't have a good material. But I feel like masks, like roughness values and dirt and like those little details go such a long way in making models look better and making that will bring a model from feeling mediocre to feeling really great is by adding those little details, little roughness value. Like, let's say, for example, back to that reference of my last model, the bicycle, when that light hits that metal and you see a little bit of a reflectiveness of like smudges or like everybody knows when you look at, I know it's very common for people to add like fingerprints on their models, like, because it looks really cool, but it does look really cool. Like those are the little details that the eyes pick up that you see in everyday life that a lot of people don't incorporate into their models. And those are the things that like will kind of like your eyes will pick up that you don't necessarily think about. So if you're trying to find ways to improve your models or make them more real, the little details go such a long way in roughness values. So I know I answered like almost all parts of your question, like blockouts are really important, masks are important, finer details are important. It's all important, but to be honest with you, those little details I think are the most important, especially if you're trying to make your models realistic. But really great question. I wish I thought about this a little bit longer before answering it, because I feel like I could have gave a better answer, but great question. Little details, man, they will go such a long way. All right, next up, we're gonna try to go through these really quickly. Mocking XD asked, what is your top tip for anyone that has been trying to get better at modeling but can't see any improvements? I feel like it comes in waves, honestly. There's so many times where it's like there's levels to everything in life, and I feel like staying consistent and quantity over quality. I know I mentioned that before, but like I remember Mr. B said this about YouTube. It's like make 100 videos before you even start thinking about how good your videos are, or something like that. I'm probably butchered how he said it, but it's just make content, make models. The more you make it, the better you will get. I feel like people will make one model a month and be like, oh, I'm not improving. It's like, well, it's like going to the gym, you know, like, can you go to the gym once a week or once a month and expect results? No, you have to go every day, or maybe not every day, but you know what I mean? The more you consistently work at it, the quicker and more results you're going to get from it. So I feel like it's the exact same when it comes to modeling. My top tip, I guess 2 top tips. 1, consistency, and 2, step out of your comfort zone. There's so many people that just are comfortable and they stay in that comfortable space, and that's not where real growth happens. All growth starts at the end of your comfort zone. So I would find a model that you know there's a specific part of that model that's going to be challenging that you don't really know well about. Pick that model because it's going to make you figure that step out, and that's where the real growth happens. And consistent. Keep doing that with every model. If you do, you know, a model a week, pick something very small, like do an iPhone. Maybe that's a little challenging for like something super basic. You can use like a pencil. It can be the easiest model technically, but it's like, okay, let's just actually try to make this pencil look super realistic. Let's make all those little tiny bumps around the eraser. Let's make some nice wood chips along the bottom of the pencil. Let's make that, like, you know, the pencil actually material really look realistic. There's so many little things you can do that really you can work towards with being a better artist. So consistency, bump up those numbers, make more models, and step out of your comfort zone. Great question. Great question as well. All these are really great. All right, another quick question from Almond. Shout out to Almond. You were one of my like longest supporters on YouTube and on Discord. So thanks for being a member. And I just want to say, by the way, everybody that's been a long-term member, I know who you are and you don't go unnoticed. And I appreciate all of you. And I keep saying I want to do something special for you guys, and I will one day, I promise. But Almond, you've been there from like so early on. So thank you for all the support. But he asked, if you had a 3D art job that kept you working on one art style for half a year, what style would you want? Well, I fortunately work at an amazing game company. I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to mention it. I don't want to take any steps I shouldn't cross. So I'll leave it for you to decide, but it's in sci-fi stuff. And I love working in sci-fi. As many of you may know, I'm kind of oddly obsessed with like aliens and UFOs. I mean, my icon is a UFO, and I could work in like the sci-fi world probably more than half a year. Specifically sci-fi, and also anything like dark and eerie and creepy. I'm a big horror fan, and if like that's why I love post-apocalyptic models. I feel like so much because there's like a darker element to it, and I love doing that. I could do that stuff every day. I feel like so dark, post-apocalyptic, or sci-fi would probably be my answer. But thanks, Almond. Big shout out to you. Next up from Polyvio, what are the main difficulties changing from Maya to Blender? I feel like there's like a huge constant debate between like which 3D software is better. And I feel like people obsess too much over that. I think the main difficulties changing from Maya to Blender is just the UI and the workflow. You know, I've specifically tried Blender before, and the UI drove me absolutely crazy. I know like it's just different. I'm used to Maya, but a lot of the fundamentals, the main tools are the same. They both extrude, they both bevel. The main fundamentals of 3D modeling is the same in all 3D software. It's just the UI and figuring out where things are. You know, it's like, where is this extrude button? Is probably harder. Like once you know the fundamentals, it's just finding where those tools are. So my answer for that would be, yeah, if you're jumping over to Blender, figuring out how things work, figuring out where the main buttons are is probably the hardest step. Because if you know how to make a model, it's not about making a model. It's about figuring out where those damn tools are. And Blender drove me crazy, but I know it's really great. So nothing against Blender. Another really quick one from Craft Dimensional. Do we need to learn a lot before we can be able to finish a complex model? I feel like I have to learn more because I don't know how to approach. And yes and no, like I feel like you don't need to know everything before starting a complex model. You just need to be willing to figure things out as you go. The key, honestly, is just breaking the project down into smaller, more manageable steps. If you try to tackle the whole thing at once, it's honestly going to feel overwhelming and you'll probably just end up quitting or not finishing it. Like there's so many times in the past that I can think of, like projects when I was starting, that I had huge goals for and big aspirations or big complex scenes I wanted to create. And when you start kind of piecing it together, it's very overwhelming. And there's so many projects I hung up and never ended up finishing because I just got simply overwhelmed. But if you start with like the blockout and then refine those forms and then move on to little details afterwards, it just becomes more approachable. And honestly, you'll learn a lot during the process, not just before it. So don't wait until you know enough to start. Just start with the simple stuff. Start with the main blockout shapes. You don't have to overthink it. And the whole approach, at least in my opinion, will be a lot more manageable. Like more complex models just require you doing little things more. Like it's hard to maybe answer that easy, but once you know the fundamentals of how to create a simple shape, like, can you Boolean? Can you extrude? Can you bevel? Well, you're just going to do that more times in more complex models because there's just more small pieces and more components in it. Like if you look at, let's say, a motor. If you were going to make a motor, a full engine motor, like it can look extremely overwhelming. But technically, if you laid out all those components separately and you tackled each component on their own, a lot of those would be more straightforward than looking at it as a whole car engine. Like a pipe, you know, like the exhaust pipe is just like a big cylinder, you know, or like I know I'm maybe simplifying a lot of this. There are some really challenging shapes, of course, but I feel like focus on learning the fundamentals and focus on learning the main tools before jumping into a really complex model. Like I wouldn't suggest or recommend anybody to just start off with building a car engine. If you're learning how to 3D model, start with something easier, but a lot of the steps are the exact same. It just requires you to do more of them because there's more pieces involved. Hopefully that answers your question. Not sure if it even does, so apologize. Next question from Dumrimkus1 asked, how easy, hard is it to switch from Maya to 3ds Max? Is it worth to switch for higher poly modeling? Yes and no. You know, I know some artists that love switching over because, 3ds Max is great for like architectural modeling, for example. But to be honest with you, I personally wouldn't. I feel like sticking to the software that you can get the job done in every software, to be honest with you. And I feel like people worry too much about what software they're going to use. Obviously, if certain studios require specific software, like that's different. You can't always, but in most cases, to be honest with you, from my experience, most large studios have licenses available for like floating seats for all of the software. And at the end of the day, you're exporting an FBX or an OBJ, but mostly an FBX. So how you're delivering that FBX is really up to you as an artist. All they care about is getting that final result. So most times, a lot of workplaces, unless you're working for a very small studio that has like limited funding, where they can't afford these licenses, most larger studios will not care. And they just want you to work with the software that you're comfortable with and the one that you're more experienced with. And all they care at the end of the day is getting that FBX. So my opinion, well, I guess you're asking, is it easy and hard to switch? I would find it hard because I'm not very familiar with 3ds Max. I started in 3ds Max. I haven't looked at it in years. So if I were to jump over, it would be a little bit more more challenging because I don't know where things are placed. Some of the workflows are obviously different in different software. So I personally wouldn't. You say, is it worth switching over for specifically higher problem modeling? I would say no. I would stick in the software that you know and just get better at it. That being said, it's always good to know different software. So it's up to you. I know some people, it's very subjective, I feel like, this question, because some people might like using different software for specific roles. But my personal opinion would be no. I would just stay in what you know more of and just get better at it, because you can achieve almost all the results in the same software. So Kapil asks, this is a great question. What's your favorite tool in 3D? And this is, but besides all the basics like extrude and bevel, because those are just like, tools you need no matter what. The first one that jumps to mind is probably Maya's 3D cut and sew UV tool. That thing is like a god tool when it comes to UV mapping. I feel like once I figured that tool existed, UV mapping was cured. It was like a cure. It was like a tool that was put out by the gods to make UV mapping easy. I honestly think that tool is amazing. It's probably my favorite 3D tool. That being said, there's a couple of other ones that jump to mind. The multi-cut tool and the target weld tool. I think those two tools are amazing. Multi-cut tool I use all the time on my models for inserting edge loops, for connecting edges. It's just amazing. And also the target weld tool because it's super handy. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to say those three tools are probably my favorite. Multi-cut, target weld, and 3D cut and sew UV tool. Another one I wanted to answer before we wrap up, and actually a lot of people ask this, is like, what type of model should I add to make my portfolio strong? And this is really important because I know a lot of you out there are building up your portfolios, so I wanted to quickly talk about portfolios. And I think you should, once again, the less is more rule applies here as well. I think having less pieces that are better, like subjectively better, is better than having a bunch of models that are mediocre. And I would have models that show the full breakdown. A lot of places want to hire people where they can see your process and see how you approached it. Rather than just throwing in a model, I would show as much information, like show the blockout stage, show the reference you use, show how you worked the high poly model, how you did low poly, how you did your textures, show your texture maps, show as much information as you can, and also make your portfolio easy to look at. I've seen some people where they have like hundreds of different little models and you're scrolling through and it's overwhelming. Like a lot of times people don't have a lot of time when they're looking at portfolios. So my suggestion would be make it very easy. You can have like a fold, like break it up per project almost. That's what I would do. So like, and within that project, maybe you have more models rather than having just all your models on your home screen kind of thing. Break it down so it's really easily accessible and easy to look at, and then give as much information as you can. And once again, less is more. I would have 2 or 3 really solid pieces over 7 or 8 mediocre ones, or 10 plus for sure, because it's too much. And I don't know, maybe that's subjective. Some people obviously think differently. But to also answer your question, what types of models, I would cater to whatever style of art you're applying for. So if you're a character artist, show character art work. Don't throw in that environment scene you also created and that prop you created, because it's very tempting to show off all your work because you want to show that you're like, a jack of all trades, or you can do lots of stuff. But sometimes that actually hinders your portfolio, at least from my experience. It's like if you're applying for a specific role, show that specific role, because that's what they're looking at. They're not going to care about if you can create a character if you're applying for a weapons artist, like it's so unrelated. So I would cater it to the style of work and also the style that the studio makes. For example, if I'm applying to Blizzard and I want to make, help work in World of Warcraft, I wouldn't make a lot of realistic architectural models. You know, it's going to be overlooked. They're not going to care because even if you're amazing at making a photorealistic building, how relevant is that to Blizzard when they're hiring for an environment artist for World of Warcraft? So cater to the studio, even if you have multiple portfolios that you're sending out to different studios. I personally think that that would be better. So less is more when it comes to model choices, and cater to the style that whatever that role is. That's my advice. But so Mina 4773 asks, what kind of models do you work on your real life job? So I had a couple of jobs. I worked a lot of years in the aerospace defense industry. So we used to call it gamified learning. So we would basically build training platforms for people that are, let's say, for example, you're about like the military has this ship and they have this really expensive equipment where you're handling some sort of crane, let's say, hypothetically speaking. Well, we would build like a VR environment where that person out of school gets to go use that machinery before they actually jump in the real world situation. So it would not only save them, tons of money, not having to actually like get a person in the real world, using real world expenses to use that equipment. And then if they mess up and they break that equipment, you're costing, millions of dollars to fix it. Well, they can mess up all they want in that virtual world. And that's kind of what I did for the longest time, is I was a 3D modeler, basically building stuff for these worlds or different training procedures that people would be in. And I did that for a long time, like 7 years-ish. And now I work at a game studio. I am an environment artist and I make things for the game world, for the game that I work in. So I'm just an environment artist basically at the end of the day. I make random props similar to what I do here on YouTube. All right, I'm going to wrap up this video, but last question is from Saket. And he asks, I followed you a lot, Polyrendr. Always loved your videos. I appreciate that. I'm 27 and want to know if it's too late for me to break into the 3D field. I am a fresher, by the way. Great question, and absolutely not. You are super young in the big picture. You could get started at like 45 and make a great career. You're never too late. So don't feel like you're 27, you're a kid in the big picture. Like you're still, I know that sounds crazy to some people, but to be honest with you, by the time you're 35 and you're 40, you're gonna look at a 27-year-old like they're a child. And you can easily get started, and over the next few years, build your skills up, build a great portfolio, and get a really cool job. So absolutely, you are not too late. You can definitely get started, and I would more than anything recommend it. It's such a great industry to work in, so fulfilling seeing your work in a game or on screen, and you can definitely do it, absolutely, without question. So you got this, man. You got it. All right, last question for this video is from Abil Baloch, and he asks, hi Polyrendr, I've been doing 3D modeling for a while now, but lately it feels like I'm stuck in a loop. I can model some shapes and objects, but overall I feel like I'm not improving or getting to the next level. Have you ever felt this in your journey? If yes, how do you get through it? Or how do you get out of it? And would love to hear your thoughts. Well, I appreciate your question, and yes, I have definitely felt like I'm not improving. I feel like I said, it kind of comes in levels. I feel like sometimes you feel stagnant and you feel like you're not improving. And I feel like a big reason is that you're not stepping out of your comfort zone enough. You need to do things you're not comfortable with. And I feel like it's very easy for people to stay in that comfort zone and make models that they're comfortable with. Like I see people making isometric rooms, which is really cool. But if you're only doing that, like, yes, you will still learn stuff, but it's hard to learn more things if you're not stepping into your comfort zone and doing things that you don't know. So my advice would be do some things that you're not familiar with. Do something that challenges you. Keep challenging yourself, because that's where the real growth happens. And it's normal to feel stuck in a loop. I felt stuck in a loop so many times. Don't feel like that's, unique to yourself. I feel like every artist gets in that same loop or stuck in that same way. You just need to stay motivated, and you can definitely do it. So stay consistent, keep making things, and keep doing things that you don't know how to do, because that's really how you grow and you learn more. There's actually a funny thing that I often tell people is that if you're not satisfied with your work, that actually means you're on the right track. I feel like when you start becoming satisfied and happy with your results, it's almost like a dangerous place to be in because it stops yourself from pursuing more and learning more. So I like to always keep myself, it might sound weird and some people might not agree with this, but I think if you're not happy with your work, you're exactly where you should be. And you just need to continue working towards it. And I think a lot of people in that situation end up giving up or taking breaks when I think you should be putting that pedal down even harder and just continue making more work. And next thing you know, you will start producing more work that you once thought you couldn't do. So it's just consistency and sticking at it. And the longer you work at it, the more results you're going to have. So next time you finish a project and you're just not happy with it, or you're disappointed with yourself and you feel like you could do more or you want to do more, that's honestly the best situation. As crazy as that is to say, I think that is such a good attribute to have because that just means you know you can do better and you will do better and you just need to keep practicing. So next time that happens, consider it a good thing. Anyways, that is basically everything. I have so many more questions here that I was hoping to answer, that I was planning to answer, but I really didn't think that this would take so long. My voice is already actually like going away from talking so much. I usually don't talk this much in videos, but I hope you guys enjoyed this and let me know in the comments what you thought about this whole process. Like, was it helpful? Was it fun just hearing people ask questions, talking about specific topics? I'm planning to do this more. Like I said, this is only episode 1 of this sort of format, and I'm thinking we can do some other that are more targeted around specific conversations. So like, you know, topology or video games, or I don't know, anything at all. Funny work experiences and just hearing other people's stories that they can send in that I can read to all of you. I feel like it'd be a cool place to kind of build more information. And of course, we're never going to stop creating models. So let me know what you thought about this ice cream truck. It was a lot of fun to make. And don't forget, you can find the full video on my Patreon page, which includes a full UV mapping process, and it's all in real time, as well as all the working files. And it's also the best way to help support my page. I make little nothing from YouTube, but my Patreon members is the best way you can really help support me in a bigger way. So please consider it. Go check it out. There's lots of models available for you guys on there if you want to get your hands on them. And as always, thank you all for supporting my work. It means a lot having all of you reach out and actually ask questions. I wasn't sure how many people would do it, and I got such an overwhelming amount of people that asked questions. It was really motivating to see that people were interested in getting questions answered. So it means a lot to me, and thank you to each and every one of you that reached out. And apologize if I didn't get to answer your question in this video. We're going to do lots more of this kind of stuff, so I'll save your questions for future videos. All right, let me know in the comments what you thought about this video, and I will catch you all in the next one.